Hello, welcome to Health Communication. This is Bram Duffee, and we're going to be talking about Chapter 16, which goes into risk and crisis communication. Risk communication is a process of informing people about the risks that are out there and persuading them to modify their behavior to reduce those risks. And it's also a function of public relations, right? Because crisis communication is meant to prevent or lessen the negative outcomes of a crisis. And it's primarily used to protect the interests of the organization at heart that's dealing with the crisis. And it has these different steps, like where they look at how to handle the situation. And then there are different things to talk about when it comes to steps and categorizing when we look at the differences between risk communication and crisis communication. Risk communication is focused on the projection of some harm that is going to occur at some other point in the future. And so it's a lot of planning and preparation, but crisis communication is an event-centered thing that's really just specific to the event. Also, risk communication gives some opportunity to plan, and crisis communication is a lot more responsive. And the risk communication is based on what's already known, but a lot of what happens in crisis communication is just based on what is known and not known. And that means that this whole risk communication can be controlled and structured with things like commercials and brochures to prepare or to communicate. Whereas crisis communication, like we said, it's a more reactive phase that we're in, is different because there's less control, more reactivity. So we would do things as an organization like press releases, speeches, press conferences, the choosing the information that's put out on the website selectively. And so one of the most widely adopted models for risk and crisis communication in a health context that has been used by the Center for Disease Control for about the last 20 years. It's called the CREC, which is the Crisis and Emergency Risk Communication. And this plan is set up in a five-stage model so that it can really dissect and look at these situations. And that helps them be able to plan and account for what needs to be done at what time. And also as a guidebook put out by the CDC on the website, you can see, I found that it's pretty enlightening. It's right out there for you to get easily. But when they break up things into different stages, it helps them be able to not just plan, but also account for what should happen when, and then also be able to evaluate the situation later and see, what improvements they could do. But when I looked at this on the website, they had 6 goals for communicating as part of this crisis and emergency risk communication plan. And the first thing was that their goal was to be first. And they recognize that crises are time sensitive and communicating information quickly is crucial. That means for members of the public, and these folks are the primary preferred source, right? That's who they're trying to communicate with. So that's be first was their number one. Their number 2 is to be right. So accuracy establishes credibility is what they're saying. And so information can include what's known, what's not known, and what's being done to fill in the gaps. So they're saying be first, be right, and then be credible is the third thing. They say that they want the messages that they communicate during these instances to be set up so that honesty and truthfulness should not be compromised during a crisis. The fourth one was to express empathy. So they recognize that crises create harm and that the suffering should be acknowledged in words, and addressing what people are feeling and the challenges they face builds trust. So empathy was number 4. Number 5 was to promote action, giving people meaningful things to do. It helps them calm anxiety and restore order, promote some sense of control. And then show respect was the number 6 thing that they listed as part of the important parts of their communication plan. Respectful communication is particularly important when people feel vulnerable. So show respect was the last one. So they're saying that be first, be right, be credible, express empathy, promote action, show respect. And so it's nice that we can see that this has been the goal for the communication plan of how the Center for Disease Control communicates. And some of the ways, like we talked about, that these crises are broken down is thinking about them in like the pre-crisis phase, and then the initial event, and then the maintenance event that happens, followed by resolution, and then the evaluating what had happened. And I'm familiar with this because when we in emergencies deal with major events, we normally think about what happened at what stage, and then we do debriefings after to review and see what we could do to make better. And so I want to go through these different stages with you that they've outlined, because each one of them kind of helps us think about what they're doing at that time to deal with the emergency, to react and respond. And then also during that time, I wanted to highlight at least one theory that applies. And so the stages that the CREC model allows for, it all starts with this pre-crisis phase. And this pre-crisis is the stage that involves planning and preparation for a potential crisis. So the inoculation theory is the one that's applicable here that we'll be talking about during what happens in this pre-crisis mode. So the inoculation theory suggests that inoculating or preparing the public about potential threats can help them resist persuasion, especially when the crisis occurs. It's all about making the audience aware of the potential issues and then equipping them with counter arguments. So let's say that we have this airline company, and we're going to call it Generic Air. So Generic Air is the example, this airline company. And Generic Air has always prioritized safety and has a good safety record, but the nature of the business means that there's always a risk of instances of things that could happen. So here's how we could apply in this pre-crisis stage what we might think about the inoculation theory that helps them prepare the public for the chance that they might have a crash. So to apply the inoculation theory, Generic Air might run an ongoing campaign that highlights the inherent risks in air travel, but then also emphasizes their rigorous safety protocols and training programs. The objective is not to scare passengers, but to make them aware of the realities of air travel and then reassure them about the precautions that Generic Air takes. So, for instance, they could release blog posts or video discussing how pilots are trained for emergency situations, or how aircraft are regularly inspected and maintained, or how air traffic control works to prevent collisions. This way, if there ever was an incident like a minor in-flight technical issue that lands them in the news, or a real crash, what happens then is that passengers and public safety are already inoculated against this whole reputation crash, so that they have a good reputation that they've built up by talking about it over time. And they've been preparing for this possibility of this kind of issues that could happen. And this is what the company does to prevent and handle, prevent worse problems and to handle them. So it's kind of like a lot of organizations that deal with high risk things have pre-planned things. Like when I was in undergrad public relations class, I had a professor who used to do public relations in the Air Force, and he talked about how a big part of their job was just this phase, this pre-crisis phase, where he said they had to write press releases for this, that, the other. They had to have them all on standby, ready to go. In case that particular incident happened, they would have a blueprint for how to communicate. And so this is the plan that they prepared for. So in my case, this Generic Air is gonna be able to prepare for any kind of sensationalist media reports or a competitor's attempt to capitalize on the incident. So when communicating during the crisis, the airline should remind public about these previously shared public messages that have gone out, this information, these measures, because this counter argument is set up in the mind of the public already so that they can push against this negative persuasion that could happen, right? So it's setting them up to make sure the public has their back. And one of the things that can happen in these situations are that you end up with, in some cases, a followership that's so great that it doesn't matter what happened. And so one example that comes to my mind is Bluebell ice cream. Bluebell ice cream got in trouble because of a listeria outbreak. And basically, I think that they had something that was unsanitary happening at one of their plants. And, the public outcry went crazy to support Bluebell, especially in Texas, because, in Texas, there's a culture down here that is really connected with what it means to be a Texan and what it means to be an American. And so that brand has been working on preparing the rest of the public for any kind of outlash for a long time, and it has to do with making the public love them. And so that's what Bluebell has done well at. But now that when it's applied to organizations that don't have, that are more prone to having emergencies, then, this kind of exercise is important. So after we go through the pre-planning stage, there's an initial event that happens. And I want to say that we're just going to label this as the onset of the actual crisis. So in this case, situational crisis communication theory comes into play. Situational crisis communication theory. It suggests that the communication during the crisis should be based on the situation or the type of the crisis, the organization's past history, and prior reputational perceptions. So let's look at an example of this last one that I gave to you. The company has such a strong positive reputation, it just went to its advantage in the crisis communication. So that's what I'm just going to label as one of the best examples of the situational crisis communication theory, because it is suggesting that the communication during the crisis is based on what has happened, what is the lay of the land for the situation. And it helps when they're trying to fix problems like recalling the product and investigating how the contamination happened. And it helps remind the public about the safety record. They have a safety record that's just so great according to what they put out. And so after the initial event, there's a maintenance stage that they talk about. And this stage is about managing and controlling the ongoing crisis. And so for this, I selected the diffusion of innovations theory because I think it's relevant at this stage. The diffusion of innovations theory is proposed by someone named Rogers back in the 60s. And it explains how, why, and at what rate new ideas and new technology spread through cultures. So let's say there's a public health crisis, like an outbreak of a new virus. The health department needs to ensure that important information about the crisis, like symptoms, prevention methods, treatment options, all that kind of stuff, reaches as many people as possible. So how this might work if we're going to apply the diffusion of innovations theory, there are going to be different people that will be set up mentally different towards the situation. And so you might also think about not just an outbreak, you all might think about a hurricane coming. And the fact that information has to be communicated during this crisis, and you have different people that are mentally set up to think different ways about what's going on. So it goes all the way from people that are, hey, I'm ready to get out here and evacuate, down to people who are saying, no, I'm staying for sure. And so this kind of thing is labeled by calling people innovators, early adopters. Then they talk about the early majority and the late majority, and then the laggards, people that lag behind. So I just want to mention these briefly. The innovators are, at first, these are the people that, information is picked up by a small group of people who are usually more risk tolerant and have connections outside of the community. So people like health professionals, journalists, or influential social media kinds of folks. And so that would be an innovator group that would be positioned to with some ability to have authority and move as an early adopter. As an innovator. And then after those innovators, the next label is early adopters. This is a group that's more ingrained with the community, and they maintain more close contact between the people and information. So there are innovators, and then there's early adopters. And then we have early majority and late majority adopters, so people that are going to, we're talking about all kinds of situations like going to get the vaccine to going to evacuate for the hurricane. When we talk about the early majority and late majority, these groups are more skeptical and need to see others adopting the idea before they do. So it's like in this, it might be like one of those things where you saw a public health practice like mask wearing or social distancing not really working out unless everybody else did. And so those people would be like the early majority, the late majority folks that require that. And I think it's funny because I was a paramedic on the front line, and I would consider myself an innovator. And it's because I, was wearing a mask first because I knew how bad it was. And then the early adopters might have been people in my family because I was pushing for them. And then the early majority and late majority that we're talking about might be people who had to see other folks to be validated. And of course, there's this last category that they have in the diffusion of innovations theory called laggards. And it's just the group that's the last to adopt the idea. They're often isolated from the majority or have certain mindset changes or specific reasons that prevent them from tuning in. And so it's by understanding this process, the health department can strategize their information that they put out. They could start out with press releases and briefings for health professionals, right? Those are the innovators. Then they could work with community leaders, influencers, those early adopters, by spreading messages through social media, or reach out directly to the public. That would hopefully, try to reach the early and late majority via mass media campaigns like the news. And then they might need to be really specific in their strategies to reach folks that are in that laggards category, folks that may not be able to have that kind of access. And in this way, the diffusion of innovations theory helps guide the most effective ways to spread the important information during a crisis. So that helps us with the working through this maintenance stage when we talk about the diffusion of innovations theory. And after the maintenance phase comes the resolution phase during the crisis. This is the stage where the crisis is resolved and normal operations can resume. And the image restoration theory is often used here. So the image restoration theory often focuses on strategies that an organization can use to restore their image after a crisis, like apologizing or denying responsibility or taking corrective action. So I would think about things that have happened during some of the train wrecks that hit communities in rural areas in extreme ways. And so I remember that, in one case in particular, apologizing and taking responsibility, making payments, those were things that happen right away. And when they do that, it's for that reason. It's working towards, this resolution. So let's take another case. Imagine a popular restaurant chain that has been linked to some kind of foodborne illness outbreak, right? And for some reason, people talk about Chipotle a lot. I love Chipotle, never been sick there. But let's say it's Chipotle. Once a crisis has been resolved and normal operations resume, the restaurant's going to need to restore its reputation. So if I'm Chipotle and I am thinking that, gosh, people think I'm going to get sick here, we need a plan, then the application of the image restoration theory would be applicable. So when we talk about the image restoration theory, there are 5 different plans that they could choose to go through. And so I want to talk about some of those. The first one is just to flat out deny. Okay, so in this case, the restaurant is certain that the food outbreak didn't originate from their food. They could certainly employ this strategy, but if this denial thing can be risky if there's evidence against them, right? So imagine they deny, and then you get workers from that want to post social media stuff about it, and it blows up. So you have to be careful. So denial is one option, though, to them, and that's as part of the image restoration theory. Another one is evasion of responsibility. So the restaurant could argue that the contamination was due to like a supplier negligence, just something that's not their fault. And that might reduce some of the blame, but obviously they're still responsible for their supply chain. So if they don't deny it and they don't evade responsibility, then reduce offensiveness is the next one on the list. So to reduce offensiveness, the restaurant could emphasize their long history of serving safe, high-quality food. They could suggest that this was an isolated incident, and they could also highlight any mitigating factors like anything like immediate closure of affected locations for deep cleaning or anything that they did to make immediate improvements. So reducing that offensiveness. The other thing is to take corrective action. So full corrective action, the restaurant should detail what they're doing to prevent future outbreaks. So that might include stricter quality checks or changing suppliers or additional staff training on food safety. And I think that when it came to Chipotle, this is what they did. I think that they did corrective action with their staff by closing all their stores at once and doing training. But I'm not sure if that's correct, if that happened at Chipotle, because we do hear about cases that happen, and when they do, the store senior management has to figure out a plan for how they're going to address this. So if it's not corrective action or reducing effectiveness, then a full apology is another option. So an apology can go a long way to restore image. The restaurant could just express sincere regret for the incident and sympathize with the people that were affected, and then reassure customers that their health and safety are the top priority. So in this scenario, the restaurant might use a combination of press release, social media posts, and even a public event or campaign that would help them communicate these messages that help them restore their image after the crisis. So through this image restoration theory, they can strategically work towards regaining customer trust and rebuilding the reputation. So now that we've been through the other stages, let's talk about the last stage, which is evaluation. This is the post-crisis stage where lessons are learned. And that's why I want to highlight the experiential learning theory in this particular time, because this theory emphasizes learning through reflection on doing. This is critical when you evaluate the effectiveness of crisis response and work to improve future responses. So take the case of a manufacturing company, and let's say that they experience a significant equipment failure. And when I think about manufacturing companies that, I don't know about y'all, when I've been listening to stuff on the Ticker Talk, I see these crane accidents that are horrible. And so I don't know if you've seen any videos like that, but there's like one part of the crane that just affects everything else. And then Lord knows where it's going to, the end of it's going to land and who all could be hurt. So let's say something like that happened. It's caused a halt in production, and the crisis is over, and the normal operations have been restored. But now we're going to apply the experiential learning theory. So according to David Kolb, who's the person who developed this theory, learning is a process that has involved into 4 stages to think about. The first one is concrete experience. So the actual event that serves as the basis for reflection. In this case, the equipment failure and the production that had to stop. So that experience, that concrete experience, is one thing. The other stage comes out as reflective observation. So here the company might review and reflect on what's happened during the crisis. They might ask questions like, how was this? How did we respond? How did this occur? How was it detected? How was the emergency protocols that we use? Were they effective? And what was the impact on production and the delivery systems? So those kinds of reflective observation. So concrete experience, reflective observation. The third one is abstract conceptualization. So based on the reflections, the company can develop new ideas about how to improve. They might decide they need to get better equipment or better maintenance routines or faster emergency response protocols, or maybe a better way of informing customers about delays. When Thanksgiving happened this last year in Houston, we had a number of people that were on the news griping and complaining because their Thanksgiving dinner was ruined because they had it catered and the catering didn't come through. And I was really blown away because at first it seemed to me that people were just really selfish, because my understanding was that the catering company caught on fire. So the company catches on fire, and so you would think that people would feel sorry for them, but instead there are people on the news saying, I didn't get my turkey, right? And it's like, what do you expect them to do? But upon more reflection, there is something for them to do. And so the effort that went into making the food now should change over to a phone call effort to alert all of the customers what had happened. And so that is, I think, the reason that such bad backlash happened in this case was because they just didn't let them know, and they didn't find out until an email came, and some people didn't get the email until the next day when they were already expecting their food. So I think that those kinds of things might have been helpful. And so the last one that is discussed when we try to apply the experiential learning theory is active experimenting. Okay, so let's say the company applies these new ideas. They might schedule more regular equipment checks and do drills to practice their responses. These kinds of things help them do well in the future. And so through this cycle, the company can continually learn from their experiences and improve on their crisis management. They learn by doing, but also on reflecting on what they've done, which is the really essence of the experiential learning theory. This way, if a similar crisis happens in the future, they'll be better prepared and able to manage it much more effectively and minimize the impact that it has on the operation and the customers. So I think that we have bounced around to look at the crisis communication in a way so that we've seen how organizations and handle the communication effort so that they can get the maximum benefit. And sometimes corporations are in a position where they have to think about their reputation. And so to communicate in ways that are ethical and that are timely and that give truth. These are all important because otherwise it just looks like the company is hiding from the problem or trying to bury their head. And so admitting guilt sometimes can be really beneficial when it comes to a communication method. But at the same time, you can imagine that admitting guilt could mean that the company is now going to face exposure to lawsuits, and admitting guilt is going to put them in a position where their attorneys may not appreciate them. But we have to have a company working together to do these things, and that's why large companies have different branches, that handle public relations and law and the money and all these things are important to be able to help them do well. And that's why it was really interesting when the Twitter or the company formerly known as Twitter got rid of so many people on their staff, because it did not, it was happening in one fell swoop when they changed over to X. And what that means is that a lot of the people were talking about what that did for them on a communication basis and inability to respond to problems, and it left them exposed. So it's just another example of what happens, when you start to cut the parts of the operation that have a big impact on what the customer or what the audience has in their mind. So I've appreciated our time together. I hope you have been able to take some good notes. If you need me, you know where I am. Thanks for today.